morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Stuart Blumenthal with ETHOSystems. I want to welcome you to our reoccurring meeting on reoccurring revenue for Sage Intacct. We hold these webinars on a monthly basis, and we're excited to hold this one on reoccurring revenue. This one's going to be taught by Carol. Carol is one of our awesome senior consultants here at ETHOSystems, and she's going to be going over how to set up some of the tips and tricks on the revenue recognition module. Let's go to the next slide, Carol, real quick. Just a couple logistics. The webinar is actually going to be about 20 to 25 minutes, so we're going to give you a little bit more time back in your day-to-day. All the phone lines are muted because we're recording this. If you have any questions, please use the questions feature within the GoToWebinar. And if you want a copy of this presentation when this is done, please let me know. One last thing before Carol gets started. This is, just so everyone knows, this is an additional module within Sage Intacct. And so some of you might have this, some of you might not have this, but this web module is designed to really help you recognize revenue on a monthly basis and book, truly go to true GAAP accounting. So with that, Carol, I'm going to turn it over to you and put myself on mute.
Thank you so much, Stuart. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. Happy Thursday, happy February, happy 2023, happy New Year and everything. My name is Caroline Garrett, and I'm one of the consultants here at ETHOSystems, and I'm excited today to go through some of the things that I've learned about revenue recognition and also billing and also invoice generation. And I'm gonna try to go slow best I can, and also bear with me. I'm recovering from a cold, so my voice is normally a little bit more upbeat than it is today. But on the inside, I'm very excited. So please feel free to put in any questions in the chat feature, and then Stuart, if you can stop me or if you can answer those questions for me, would be great. And in the meantime, I'll be pausing here and there to see if there's any questions. And without further ado, I'm excited to go through the revenue recognition and also recurring invoices process in Sage Intacct and how we set that up. And we're going to go through a case scenario of a particular invoice all the way through from beginning to end. And hopefully by the time we're done, it will all make sense and it will all be put together. So it's similar to almost like building a cake, right? So these are for the requirements. These are the ingredients, if you will, or the requirements that we need in Sage Intacct or the foundation that we need to set up correctly for this process to work. And the first thing we need to have is the order entry application. And that normally comes with the core of the system, but the one that's very similar to what Intacct, Stuart mentioned, the revenue management piece, that needs to be, that's a different charge or a separate charge. And we can give you that information outside of this call, but that needs to be configured or subscribed to along with the order entry subscription. And then the third thing we need to set up correctly is users in terms of the license that they need and the permissions that they need to do to go through the workflow. And then the fourth thing that we would need are the contracts that we would need to load in the system that we will be billing for, or the recurring services that we would need to add into the system. The fifth piece that we need to set up correctly is customers. And I'll show you the piece that matters when it comes to these types of invoices. The next thing we need to set up correctly is what we call items, and items are just the representation of the revenue that we're going to be recording. They are loaded in the system as items. And then the last piece that puts it all together is a queue, or what we call a transaction definition in order entry. And it's really just a queue or a bucket where all these invoices are held. And then and then they're pushed to accounts receivable from that point, from this transaction queue into accounts receivable. And that's how we're able to now receive payment from the customer once we're done billing. And so this is the foundation of how we need to set things up. So we need to set this up correctly. Then the second piece we need to set up in this process is the actual templates for revenue recognition. So we're going to be talking about two things that come together. One of them is an invoicing piece, an invoicing side of the system where we actually create the invoice that we bill to the customer. At the same time, when that invoice is created, we're also recognizing revenue behind the scenes. So those two come together in one. So the first thing we're going to set up is the template for the revenue recognition. And we can set up to 4 types. We can set up a monthly template, a quarterly template, semi-annual, and an annual. And all this means is for the monthly one, we're just saying that we want to recognize revenue on a monthly basis. Quarterly, we just want to recognize revenue, just like the word says, 4 times a year, semi-annually twice a year, and annually once a year. But normally the one I've seen that's most common is the monthly template. So then we need to set this up, and I can show you an example of the monthly template and how it needs to be set up in this case. So for my monthly template on here, I have simplified it, and the fields that I need to go through or set up are the nature of the recognition method. So I just simplified it, and I just selected straight line in this case, so the same amount every month. And then for the recognition schedule, I want it to be monthly. And so, and then this is where we can set up the quarterly. If we want to recognize revenue on a quarterly basis, you select from the dropdown quarterly or semi-annually or annually. But in this case, my example is monthly. And then on the posting date, this is important because it determines the date that we're posting in the GL, the revenue itself. And so the options are a particular day. So if you want to post revenue on the 1st or the 15th or the 20th or the end of the month, this is where you select, this is where you guide the system for that. So for my case, I just selected end of period. And all that means every last day of the month is when the revenue will be recognized. So 1/31/2023, 2/28/23, and so on. But if you want to recognize revenue on the 15th of each month, I would just change the posting date from end of period to 15. And then Intacct would know to post it on 1/15, 2/15, 3/15, and so forth. For the next piece that we need to set up correctly on the how revenue needs to be recognized is the terms. The fixed period just means we need to add the number of periods to help Intacct know how many times we want to recognize revenue. And then the field right below that's grayed out, that shows number of periods, that's where we would need to now add whether it's 12. So if we want to recognize 12 times, we would add number 12. If it's 24, which is what, 2 years, then we would add 24 on there. If it's 13, you would add 13 as a number there. I just selected the contract term because we can also base it on the contract term, the beginning and end times of the contract, and then Intacct knows to generate however many in revenue schedules, if you will, from the contract term. In this case, if my contract starts on 1/1 for simplicity, 2023 to 12/31/2023, it knows to recognize revenue 12 times, once a month, at the end of the month, if you will. The other piece that we need to determine is when we want the revenue recognition to start. So we can either base it on the beginning of the invoice, or we can base it on specific or customized date. In this case, user specified, which is what I have selected on here. And the user specified is just linking it to the contract term that I have in place, if you will, and then the 15th of, or the end of the period in this case, of every month. Then the next powerful thing that Intacct does is it gives us the option to either automatically post the revenue for us as the months go on, or we can do it manually where somebody would now have to log into the system and then go and trigger the schedules to be run at that point. That's the manual route. But if you want Intacct to do it for you, select the automatic radio button on here. Any questions so far? Okay.
None from the group. None from the group.
Okay, sounds good. I will take, okay, thank you, Stuart. Okay, moving right along. The third piece, the next piece we need to set up for this process is the transaction definition. So we've identified the revenue templates, monthly, quarterly, semi, and annual. Now we need to set up the queue where all these contracts are going to be centrally located, if you will. And then the biggest piece here when we're configuring that transaction definition or queue are two pieces. One, we want to be able to recognize revenue. And this piece is important because it is enabled from the revenue management subscription. So without that subscription, these revenue pieces would not populate on the order entry transaction. So we have to be configured to that module. But then when that's done, then when we're configuring order entry, we need to be able to enable to posting the revenue recognition. If we don't enable it, we're not going to be able to recognize any revenue. So in this case, I have mine selected to post. And on top of that, if I want Intacct to generate renewals for me, I can also select that option as well. We can also choose not to disable, we can also choose not to enable it as well. But for my case, I have it enabled so that it can generate the renewals for me automatically. So it's important to configure order entry right. Then the next thing we need to set up is the renewal templates, because I do have it set to generate renewals. So I need to help guide Intacct with what type of template it needs to pick up, so it knows what type of invoice to generate the next year around when the current contract ends. And so we do that again in order entry under the renewal template. And the two good things on here on the renewal template, it gets a little bit in the weeds, so I don't have a whole lot of pieces on that because we can always handle that outside of this call. But for the nature of what in essence it does, the renewal template, when we're setting it up, it allows us to create a new invoice with markups or with discounts, or if you still want to keep the same renewal amount, the same rate, we also have the option to choose that. But if you want to increase the billing from a particular amount to a new amount, we're able to create to include that markup, and then Intacct will generate the next invoice in the next contract billing period to show the new invoice amount, if you will. The second piece it does is we are also able to send an email alert either to the customer. We can also make it internal where we are alerted that the renewals are coming up, and we can even set up the schedule of when we want these to be ran. So if we want to be notified 60 days in advance or 45 days in advance or 30 days in advance, we can actually do that. And so if you want the customer to be alerted like, hey, your renewal is coming up to an end, this is a great way to have the system auto-generate that for us and then blast it out in an email to the client, to the customers. So that's the power of the renewal templates if we want to go that route. Then the next thing we need to set up correctly is the customers, along with bringing in their addresses and their names. We also need to think about how we want the customers to receive the invoices. So in this case, on the import template of customers, we normally have a feature where we determine whether we want the customer to receive an email invoice, or if we want to print it and then we send it out to them and mail it out to them. The only thing I want to call out on here on the setup as a tip is if we select the email method, we have to have an email on file. If we don't have an email on file, the import file for the customers will fail if we don't have an email on file. So that's the only tip I just wanted to call out on here, but we can always print it and send it out to the customer in that way. And then the next setup we need to do, there's a whole lot of setup here, but we're almost done to putting it all together. The next setup we need to set up is the nature of the services that we're billing for. And in this case, we need to set them up as what we call items, which is a dimension in Intacct. And we need to set them up as non-inventory items. And essentially what we're doing is we're changing the revenue that we're recording based on these items. So in case it's some type of membership that we want to collect money on, or some subscription or some type of service, we need to set each one of those services up and hinge it to a grouping that is linked to a revenue account. And that is how we are able to record revenue in the system through the items setup, if you will. And then the next thing now is we're able to now bring it all together, beginning with the customer and the setup of the email address. As you can see, I just added a made up email address for PGE invoices@gmail.com in this case. And it's populating here on this transaction that I had created. This for me is a monthly revenue recognition. but it's a contract for a whole year from January to December for simplicity, for some online subscription. And as you can see on my item ID in the section below, I have my item as online subscription. I have my revenue recognition template for the 12-month straight line. I have my start and end dates for my contract, simply the first of the year to the end of the year. I also have my renewal template because I want this to be recurring. I want this to be a renewal template. So in 2024, January, Intacct should be able to create a new invoice for me to bill because of this renewal template right here. And then the price, I simplified it as $1,200 so that we can recognize revenue at $100 per month. And then the rest of it, so once I generated this contract in the system, the next piece I want to show you is the revenue schedule that is in place based on the revenue recognition template, the SL 12 months. And this is what it looks like. So now it's done the work for me, and it has already set the schedule straight. So every last day of each month, as you can see based on the posting date here on the screen, every end of the month, it will be recognizing $100 of revenue and then offsetting the deferred revenue account for every month all the way till December 31st. And it will continue because I do have a renewal template. And if I do have a markup on there, it will bill based on the 1,200 plus the markup. That will be the invoice for the next year in 2024. So this for me is really important because it saves time on FTE hours, number one, because the system is doing the journal entries for us. It's also generating the invoices for us. And all we need to do is go in the system and just trigger the billings, if you will, or the invoices, and just send those out to the customer. That's really all we have to do. So this is really powerful if we set it up this way and automatically done for you. And then the other way so that was just manually putting in that contract in the system manually. We also have the power of recurring transactions where we can set up a lot of, if we have a lot of subscriptions or contracts that we need to load in the system, number one, we can utilize the import templates to do that for us as a one-time import file. The second thing is we can also set up the recurring invoices. So for example, in a case where I want a monthly invoice of the $100, in our case where we have a $1,200 contract, if you will, but we need to send out an invoice every single month, so we can set up a recurring so that somebody doesn't have to go into the system and type in a new invoice every single time. So in the recurring field, in the recurring transactions field, we need to set up two things. We need to tell Intacct, this is a customer, this is the amount I'm billing, this is the contract is from this period to this period, this is the template I want you to use for recognizing revenue. On top of that, we can also give Intacct a schedule, which is the second piece here shown on the screen. And the schedule now is what generates the invoices. And so, for example, if we want a customer that has a quarterly billing, every 3 months they receive an invoice, this is where we tell Intacct, okay, I want the first invoice to start on the 1st of the year, and I want you to repeat on a monthly basis, but I want you to repeat every 3 months. Instead of 1 month, repeat every 3 months. So every 3 months, Intacct generates an invoice. So this customer would receive 4 invoices in a year because they're on a quarterly billing schedule. And so essentially for the $1,200 contract example, each quarterly invoice would be for $300, $300, but every 3 months, Intacct is recognizing revenue at $100 every month. So we still keep the integrity of recognizing revenue on a monthly basis, but we're able to bill quarterly. For the same example, if the customer needs to receive the bill semi-annually, we would just now tell Intacct repeat every month, but for 6 months, every 6 months. And so that would generate 2 invoices within the year. If it's an annual invoice for $1,200, we tell Intacct to repeat monthly, but every 12 months. And that's how we set up those invoices to be generated by the system automatically for us. So while still recognizing revenue. So to bring it all together, the other cool thing that we can do with the revenue management or revenue recognition subscription in Intacct, we can also generate invoices that are different dates. and we can also recognize revenue at different dates. So the two don't have to be tied together. And that's important for separating, because we're doing two different things. I think that to me is very important to be able to separate those two independent processes that are inherently tied together. So if you want invoices to show that they are billed on the 1st of the month, or the 15th of the month or the 30th of the month, but you want revenue to be recognized on the 17th or the 1st or the 21st or the end of the month, we can set up the schedules as such. We can also recognize revenue on a monthly. We can also recognize it on a quarterly basis, a semi-annually basis, and an annually basis, while we're billing at different times as well. And so the last piece now we need to do, now that we've put everything together, is billing the customer. And this is where the power of setting up the customer correctly comes in place. So in this case, because I had an email address on file for PGE customer, in this case, I'm able, when I go to print an email option for this customer, I'm able to now generate the email to the customer. And as you can see on there, Intacct is kind enough to also give us a preview of what the attachment would look like, so we can see what the customer sees as well. And so, and we can also do this in bulk as well, or blast it out if we're billing, if all of these recurring revenue schedules are billed at one particular point in a month, we can actually send them all out in bulk as well. But this is just an example of one. Any questions so far?
No, it's been a quiet group, Carol.
All right, I like it. Well, that could mean one or two things. Hopefully, it means all good. In that case, that summarizes the whole process from beginning to end. If you have any questions, sounds like we don't have any questions. So, Stuart, I will hand it back over to you.
Awesome, great job. So yeah, that was a lot of work putting all that together and documenting that. Really appreciate you doing that and taking time out of your day to prepare and present. So thank you so much. Great job, Carol. So a couple key things coming up just so that everyone's aware of upcoming webinars. So next week, same time, but next week, exactly 1 week from today, we're going to be going over the 2023 R1 release for all clients. This has some cool features in there. They've added some additional nice screens to the contracts area to make it a little bit nicer, the ability to post that directly to the general ledger. And we're going to talk about retainage next week and some of the changes they made to retainage so that you can include retainage on a contract invoice as well. So some great construction additions, as well as just other changes they made to 2023 R1. Remember, that release is going to go out the next day on Friday in the evening. So plan on making sure that you're done with Intacct around 8:00 p.m. Pacific time that day. The following month, we're going to be working on talking about project contracts and AIA billing. So a little bit of extension on what we learned next week. And then we'll talk about, again, the following month on retainage and then change orders. So continuously focusing on a lot of the construction areas within Sage Intacct. If you have any questions about the links on how to register for these, please let me know. You should receive our emails. If you want to have anyone added to those email distribution lists, please let me know. So with that, doesn't look like we have any other questions. So Carol, if you want to go one step further, perfect. So if you do have any questions along the way, feel free to reach out to myself, Stuart, or Carol, and you have all of her information there. Again, Carol, great job putting this together. Really appreciate it. And want to thank everyone for their time today.